Hello, everybody, and welcome to an EPP Group podcast here in the European Parliament. We're talking about disinformation. We're talking about those echo chambers and the social networks that use alternative news, using alternative facts, that hijack elections, that hijack politics, that pose a security threat, as we saw on January 6th at the U.S. Capitol building. 20 years ago, we talked about an information highway and how wonderful it was, but it can also be a highway to hell, as potentially destructive as it is constructive. And that's what we want to talk about over these next few minutes, about how Facebook and Twitter, they pulled the plug on Donald Trump after what happened there at the Capitol building. What is the impact here in Europe? And that's why we're talking to two MEPs who are on the Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs Committee, as well as a special committee on disinformation. Welcome, Rasa Juknevičienė.
Yes.
And also to Vladimír Bilčík. Welcome.
Thank you.
And joining us from stateside, from the U.S., is Rick Wilson. He is a co-founder of the Lincoln Project. And Rick, you wrote the book, Everything Trump Touches Dies, and Running Against the Devil, a plot to save America from Trump and the Democrats from themselves. Rick, could you have imagined January 6th? Was that maybe an accident waiting to happen? That the books you wrote, it's almost like I told you so, right?
No, it wasn't just that I imagined it, it's that I predicted it. There was only one outcome if they lost this election that would satisfy the conspiratorial nature of what republicanism has become in America. And that is this idea that there is a vast conspiracy seeking only to oppress conservative voters, and that there is some sort of nefarious plot to destroy their culture, their lives, their livelihoods, etc. And so you saw the increasing degree of rhetoric from senators like Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and Rick Scott and many others who came out and said, we're contesting these election results, they're fraudulent, and any action is justified to overturn a fraudulent election.
Okay, so
they
encouraged people, right? They encouraged them. But now what happens after they kind of got slapped down? Is there still staying power? Is there still danger here up ahead, stateside?
Absolutely, and these folks took a hard hit. They realized that when the National Guard troops were deployed into D.C., they couldn't face up against 40,000 actual combat soldiers who were there to protect the Capitol, protect the incumbent, or to protect the incoming president. And so they've slunk off into the shadows right now, but they are still being completely directed and encouraged and motivated by people like Josh Hawley, who is the head of the Sedition Caucus, who is still trying to overturn the results of this election, who is now one of the de facto leaders of a violent far-right conspiracy that has a social media infrastructure that's feeding it fuel every day and telling it every day what you did wasn't wrong, what you did was standing up for Trump, what you did was justified. They're talking about secession. They're talking about violent revolution. They're talking about armed insurrection. I mean, these are things that are far beyond not only the norm of American politics, but the pale.
Okay, but we don't want to be too alarmist. I mean, there is, a constitution. There is a due process. People are getting arrested. So, I mean, it's
look, barely though. We had a near-death experience. Okay, the meteor went past the Earth and burned through the atmosphere.
Yeah.
There are other meteors out there that we can't rest until we do something decisive to hold those people who did this accountable. In politics, if you politically subsidize a behavior, you get more of it. If you subsidize bad actors, you get more of them.
Well,
if you subsidize and people and give them a pass on inciting violence, you get more of it.
Okay, well, we see more of this kind of stuff in Europe. What danger is there, Rasa, of this happening in Europe?
Europe as a whole, I mean, not only European Union. I am sure that the United States, they will overcome this crisis. And now very many people understand what happened. And lies is unacceptable everywhere. But for me, this fake news and the main sources of lies and disinformation comes from Russia, China, Iran, other countries.
Right.
How
do you counter that?
It's what we are doing now in the new established committee and working a lot. You know, I was born in Soviet Union, occupied Lithuania.
Right.
Half of my life I spent in the country, whereas fundament of that country was lie.
Yes.
So very many people understand what does it mean up to now, but maybe not in other countries. For Americans, maybe it's very new today to hear such kind of disinformation and lies. So myself, I am concerned that we have to have some balance when we speak about social media, about regulations, because look what Belarus, look at Russia today. They are using social media as a tool for freedom.
Right. And so what is the special committee pushing for right now?
And special committee now we are investigating mainly the issue, the topics. We are working with diagnosis of the situation. And as medical doctor, I have to say that only after the right diagnosis, you can use the right treatment to the subject. So now we are doing this, and I think at the end of this year, we will have more or less clear report or proposals to ourselves and our partners what to do.
Vladimír, what do you maybe anticipate coming up that the special committee could propose to prevent some kind of an explosion like we saw in Washington?
Well, thank you very much. I was shocked at what happened in Washington, D.C. As somebody who spent years in the United States studying in the 1990s, I thought this, could never happen.
Someplace else,
and so did many Americans. So I think this is a real warning light to all of us. It's a real warning light that democracy is and can be under threat. As a result of the amplifying power of the social media across the world. You know, if this can happen in the United States, yes, it can happen in Europe. And we have a problem. We have a problem in Europe. I agree with Rasa. We've faced huge pressures on our democracy from external powers. Russia, China, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, a number of countries which we've tried to really have direct influence in the nature of European democracies. But I think we are facing a fundamental problem with the amplifying power of the social media. And what we're trying to do in this special committee is to not only have a diagnosis of what's going on, but also to propose solutions. And this is really a timely effort because we have a number of political and legislative issues in the pipeline in this parliament, such as Digital Services Act. And we are hoping heavily to contribute with our outcome in this committee to what we can do to improve and to control the social media, the power of the social media, as much as we should be able to resist and be more resilient when it comes to the external influences in our European democracies.
So you think there should be more regulation. You shouldn't leave it up to Silicon Valley to pull the plug on somebody like Trump, right?
I am absolutely convinced we need regulation, we need laws, we need rules. A person, just because he's got a lot of money, he's got a lot of power because he owns a company which has been globally successful, shouldn't be the one to decide on what communication channels there are at the disposal of a U.S. president or any president, any prime minister.
Right.
We need rules on this, and we need clear rules on this at the level of the European Union because that gives us leverage.
But not censorship.
No.
How do you draw the line there? Rasa, how do you draw the line there?
This is utmost important, the balance. I already mentioned the balance. So what we have offline regulations, we have to look at the same regulations, what is important, what is important to say that is unacceptable. In online as well. But also, I would like to draw attention that not only regulations, but the flows of dirty money.
Right.
For those, they are financed. They are doing this not only from outside, but from inside Europe as well. And they are using the same methods. And populism is coming also because of the lie, because of disinformation.
It feeds the fire.
And very many actors inside Europe, they are financed from outside by dirty money. So it's also our topic to discuss.
Rick, I see you nodding there, and I wonder, because I know in the U.S. there's a lot of aversion to regulation, and yet if you don't have regulation, then it's up to Silicon Valley to decide what's good and what's not, right? What do you think?
Well, what's happened in America is you've ended up with a situation where you've got 4 or 5 major players in these market segments at most. I mean, in terms of social, Facebook is the long tail. They have 90+% of that market. Twitter has, of the short form social, 90+% of that market. And these companies have been very smart in Washington about going to, they hire the best lobbyists, they hire tons of people, they write the regulations on their own for their own benefit. They structure the regulatory environment in a way that benefits them. So it's very difficult to see how regulatory structures keep up exclusively with the needs here. There's also got to be more corporate responsibility about this.
Well,
Their shareholders need to be up in arms about this.
Right.
So, regulation is a part of this. Antitrust, I think, is the first wedge to go into these problems, to tell these companies that if you're bad actors in our political space, if you're bad actors in spreading disinformation, spreading propaganda, inciting violence, or enabling this kind of thing, that you don't have an unlimited runway, and we will come in with some regulatory and antitrust solutions. I think antitrust is the start of it in the U.S. environment.
Yeah.
And in Europe, you have a greater degree to apply regulatory strictures than you do in the American political system.
I see. Right. Vladimir, what do you think? Could that be a step? Is the antitrust angle?
I think antitrust angle is one aspect of this. We have a common European market, and we need to have free and fair competition. And fair means that you allow access to other players as well. And I agree with Rick. If you have 4 or 5 major guys who've divided the market and control the market fully, there is something very unhealthy about this. So the market regulation is a part of this. But you've really touched on an important question, and that's disinformation. Disinformation is not necessarily illegal. It's the gray zone.
Yeah, there's got to be free speech too,
It's
right?
the gray zone, and we need to protect the free speech.
Yeah.
But I think there are a number of regulatory measures we can do effectively to really make sure that disinformation is not as widespread as it is. There has to be a control to this, because what happened in the U.S. was a result, and has been a result, of a systematic, manipulative campaign which got out of proportion and actually mobilized a huge chunk of the American public. This is something which is dangerous. So this is where we need to look at the regulatory action. And we already know from the actions of the social media that actually they can do this on their own if they want to.
Yeah.
They can change the algorithm on Facebook and Twitter to make sure that credible news have advantage on their networks over lies and propaganda, which is completely manipulative. They can do this. But I think we need to do this on the basis of common rules, which are going to be binding for all social networks,
right?
And which are going to give us also a lot more transparency and information in terms of our understanding what they are doing. Let me just give you an example. Okay. European Union is a union composed of states, smaller and larger. We already have some legislation in some of these states, such as Germany, but we need a European regulation to protect particularly the public in vulnerable small states. There has to be the same level of protection, the same level of transparency with respect to disinformation, manipulative content in countries with languages which are spoken by a few million people, just like my native Slovak, for instance, or the languages of the people in the Baltic states. So I think this is important. We need to look at the European action to give us power vis-a-vis the social platforms, but at the same time, we need to make sure that we protect everybody in Europe equally.
There is already legislation on the EU level, Rasa, where you have to take, if there's something that causes radicalization, you have to take it off within an hour, right? There's that 1 hour rule. Do you think that should be widened and applied to something like this?
Yes, it's one of the instruments, I think. But on the other hand, I would like to say that social media changed our life. And we are not dependent so much now on one or another journalist, one or another party opinion. I can witness this during my political life.
Right.
And we need not only to think about 1 hour rule, but also look, still troll factories exist in very many countries. This example goes into internal life of political life in many countries. Fake accounts, spreading disinformation, hidden paid advertising. So it's a lot to do to regulate.
And there's an even more sinister aspect, is the hybrid warfare aspect, right? Using disinformation. And you're on the NATO committee here in the Parliament. You're also a security defense.
Everywhere.
How much of that is a threat, and how do you counter that?
I think it's one of the most important threats today because the wars are different now. Look into what's going on, especially on Eastern Partnership countries, where Russia is doing job attacking people's minds, people's thinking.
The countries to the east
And
of the
especially,
European Union.
and of course in Europe itself, because all those populistic anti-European movements, very often they are related with something outside. So regulation, one thing, but it's utmost important for us will be to find balance and to understand that social media is doing a lot in favor of democracy as well, to express people and so on.
Then how do you fight this disinformation? Shouldn't there be a go-to place where you can debunk whatever inflammatory disinformation there is?
Oh yes, so I think that we have to do more on expertise, not only here in the European Parliament, but in national parliaments, with national governments as well, because mainly this is a subject before election. Before national election, before all elections. So those countries, every country has to have like stratcoms. We have, for example, in my country, we have to educate people.
Yeah.
It's utmost important. Young people in the schools, education has to be increased about
to read
how to
with a more critical mind.
Of course,
right?
How to find what is, because it would be impossible just to regulate and just to say people it's wrong or it's good or it's wrong. So people have to be, to understand and to find their own way how to find the lie.
Rick, with the Trump effect it was a lot of people, it fascinated people, even if they didn't agree with him. They were fascinated by him. And how much of a lasting impact does that have in the U.S.? How come so many people believed him?
Well, I think that one of the things we discovered in our research over the years, starting back in 2015, was that Donald Trump had been on television in America as a reality TV star for 15 years.
Yeah.
They believed they were electing the character they saw on The Apprentice.
He was in everybody's living room for years, right?
Right. They thought he was a great manager, a great leader, a smart thinker, a good businessman, a great negotiator. And so that bought him a ticket to the dance, as we say.
Yeah.
But what happened is, once he got into the campaign, social media fueled the ability for him to use, his celebrity to leverage against the other candidates. It turned out Americans really were quite naive about who he was, obviously, and they found themselves, in this social media bubble that became increasingly hermetic, that sealed them off. So if you were a Trump supporter, you started seeing on your Facebook feed and your Twitter feed other Trump supporters.
Yeah.
You started seeing more and more lurid conspiracy theories that justified his behavior.
The echo chamber, right? Yeah.
Yes, more and more of an echo chamber and less of a political dialogue.
Yeah.
These tools aren't morally agnostic anymore. They can drive people into a bubble from which it's very difficult to escape.
So that's there. I mean, that has to be countered as well. What advice do you have to Europe? And how much of a parallel do you see between Trump and the populists in Europe?
There is a global rescission of democracy that is desired by a segment of the far right. Steve Bannon is sort of the godfather of that in the U.S. He's also very active in a number of European countries. He's trying to push a number of these far right and extremist candidates.
He's trying to, but I don't think he's getting anywhere, is he, with his Breitbart? He's not in Europe.
Look, here's the problem. For years and years, the crazy populists didn't get anywhere in the U.S. either.
Yeah.
And they found that felicitous combination for them of a celebrity, a populist movement, an inherently amoral political mindset. And at some point, you have to keep stomping these things out. You can't let fascism or radical populism or radical nationalism grow.
Okay.
You can't stomp it out. You can't pretend it doesn't exist.
And then how do you stomp it out without stomping out free speech?
Listen, free speech is one of the fundamental and most inherent human rights. But it is also the right of people to not be on the soft side of democracy, as Ian Applebaum says. Democracy and freedom and in the U.S. maintaining a republic requires a publicly engaged fight. You can't just say, oh, it's cool. It's his free speech to say it's cool to burn crosses in black people's yards.
Yeah.
You can't just say it's cool for them to motivate in storming the Capitol and murdering 5 people, including a police officer. You can punch back hard. As the Lincoln Project, we punch back hard in favor of democracy and freedom. The idea that free speech is a suicide pact is wrong. You have to counter radical speech with a fiery and sometimes aggressive defense of freedom, a defense of liberty, a defense of individual liberty and integrity. These people rely on you being silent.
Yeah.
They rely on scaring the Democratic side into submission. And we don't fight that way. We fight back in their face hard.
But this can be like whack-a-mole, you know, where it rears its head in different places, different parts of the world. I mean, disinformation knows no borders. Vladimír, how do you fight this on a global level? And do you see potential now that there's a new administration in Washington that the EU and the US can join forces in fighting disinformation? That's going to be to you also, Rick. But yeah, first, Vladimír.
Let me just very clear on this. We are not going to get rid of disinformation. It's been here. It was here long before the social media. It's always been here. Conspiracies, propaganda, these things have always been here. What has changed is the methods that are being used, and of course the technology which is being used. And as you said at the beginning, you know, we all thought the social networks, information highway. And I completely agree with Rick. We need to protect free speech. That's important. It's the essential aspect of democracy. It's the essential aspect of how we work here in the European Parliament. But there has to be a much greater sense of responsibility and transparency when it comes to the amplifier of the free speech. Because what happened, and we've seen this, it happens with tragic consequences repeatedly already on social networks, is that you have people dying in the capital. You have people dying because of COVID, believing that COVID doesn't exist. People dying thinking that they are not going to get vaccinated.
We're keeping our distance, by the way.
I know we are, and I hope we are safe and that we are safe after this.
Yes.
But the point is, you're right, this is a global phenomenon, and that's why we need to fight it ideally with global rules.
Yeah.
And we need to start at the European level.
Yeah.
We need to work closely with our American partners, and I hope with the Biden administration we'll have a good and fair talk on this.
Yeah.
And I think we need to also go global to make sure that there is a much greater sense of social networks globally when it comes to the spread of disinformation.
Rasa, what do you think? And also being on that NATO committee, security and defense, how do you fight that on a global level?
You know, democracy is not for granted.
Yeah.
We have to take care of democracy every day, like we take care of our body, taking bath every day. So it's the same. It will never become the situation when we will think equally. And I would say both extreme sides are dangerous. Extreme right, extreme left. As well, we saw also in the States, also saw from another side also violence, not only United States, but in other countries. Yes, it's very important just to speak about, and not only, I repeat myself, not only regulations, but also education and responsibility of politicians from different flanks, left, right, center. All these people have to be responsible, and of course, we have to fight autocracies.
Yes, right.
To help people to fight autocracies.
Yeah.
Because everything is coming from autocratic regimes.
Rick, I want to get to you, but Vladimír, you had a quick comment.
Just quick point on this. I completely agree with Rasa on one important thing we need to do, and this is where I think we need to also join forces across the Atlantic. We need to really be serious about serious, credible media and media sources. Journalists across the world have to have our support. Credible journalism has to have our support. This is something we are serious about in the European Union, and this is where we need to join forces. Today, it seems like anybody can be a media person or journalist. We need credible journalists working with credible sources, and these have to be the ones that actually are watched and followed by the majority of the people. Because otherwise, if we stop believing in credible facts, in credible science, in credible journalism, this is the end of democracy.
Rick, a couple final words, because I got to wrap this up. But this idea about U.S. and EU cooperating on something like that, what potential do you see there?
I think it's more than past time that people who believe in freedom and democracy and liberty ally themselves against the forces of disinformation, hostile propaganda, and take the steps that are required to protect those things that we believe so deeply in. Because if we don't, no one will have freedom of speech. The alternative is not a different right-wing version of this. It is a complete shutdown of freedom of speech. We've seen this movie before, and no one wants to go back to it.
Rick, thank you very much. Rasa as well. Vladimir as well.
Thank you.
Great to talk. We'll be doing this again before long. So thanks very much, everybody, for watching. Thanks to the speakers, and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.